I never touched her. Jasmine Carter's scream ripped through the Dallas County Courthouse, raw and desperate, as the bailiff forced her back into her seat. Her chest heaved. Her hands trembled. Across the room, billionaire Marcus Thornton refused to meet her eyes, the same eyes that had watched over his daughter for 3 years. The photograph on the screen showed a 5-year-old's bruised face. The crowd called her monster. The prosecutor called her guilty. But what no one knew, what would shatter this courtroom to its foundation, was that little Sophie Thornton was about to speak 3 words that would destroy everything. Comment below which city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. Order! I will have order in this court. But Judge Harrison's voice drowned beneath the storm. The gallery had already erupted, whispers becoming shouts, shouts becoming accusations, hurled like stones at the woman in the defendant's chair. Monster! Child beater! Lock her up! Jasmine. Carter gripped the edge of the defense table so hard, her knuckles went white against her dark skin. Her attorney Rachel Torres pressed a hand to her arm, but Jasmine couldn't feel it. Couldn't feel anything except the weight of 100 eyes crushing her chest. Please, she whispered. Please, I didn't. Silence, Miss Carter. The judge's gavel struck again. Jasmine flinched as if he'd hit her. At the plaintiff's table, Evelyn Pierce adjusted her pearl necklace and leaned toward Marcus Thornton. Her lips barely moved, but her words carried like venom. Look at her falling apart. Guilty people always crumble, Marcus. This needs to end. Today. Marcus's jaw tightened. His fingers curled around his fountain pen until the metal bit into his palm. He kept his eyes fixed on the polished wood in front of him, refusing or unable to look at the woman he'd trusted with his daughter's life for 3 years. Jasmine saw it. She saw him leaning toward Evelyn, saw his shoulders stiffen like armor was being strapped to his back. Marcus! The cry escaped before she could stop it. Rachel grabbed her arm, hissing a warning, but Jasmine was already on her feet. Marcus, please look at me. The courtroom gasped. The judge raised his gavel. Miss Carter, you will sit down immediately. 3 years. Jasmine's voice cracked, tears streaming freely now. 3 years. I raised your daughter. I fed her when you were too busy. I rocked her to sleep when she cried for her mother. I held her through every nightmare, every fever, every... Enough! The gavel thundered. 2 bailiffs moved toward her, but Jasmine stood her ground, her eyes locked on Marcus. You know me, she sobbed. You've seen me with Sophie. You know I could never hurt her. Please, Marcus. Please just look at me. For one heartbeat, one fragile, trembling heartbeat, Marcus Thornton's eyes lifted. They met Jasmine's across the courtroom, and something flickered there. Memory. Doubt. The ghost of Sophie's laughter echoing through the halls of his Dallas estate. The sound of Jasmine's lullabies drifting from the nursery at midnight. Then Evelyn's hand slid over his, her nails pressed gently into his skin. A reminder. A warning. Marcus looked away. She betrayed my trust. His voice came out hard, rehearsed, hollow. My daughter had bruises on her face. Bruises, Jasmine. And you expect me to believe that was an accident? It wasn't me. Jasmine collapsed back into her chair, her body shaking with sobs. Ask Mrs. Patterson next door. Ask the cashier from the grocery store. We baked cookies that night, Marcus. Sophie was laughing. She was happy. The prosecutor rose smoothly, straightening his tie. Your Honor, this emotional display is nothing more than manipulation. We have photographs. We have testimony. The child's own father affirms the truth of this abuse. He clicked a remote, and the screen behind the witness stand illuminated. Sophie Thornton's face filled the courtroom. 5 years old. Blonde curls. Blue eyes wide with something that looked like fear. And across her left cheek, a bruised dark purple spreading like spilled ink across porcelain skin. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Oh God, Jasmine breathed. No. No, no, no. The evidence speaks for itself. The prosecutor continued, his voice rising with practiced outrage. This woman who was trusted to care for a child, inflicted this injury. The defense has no credible rebuttal. The photographs don't lie. The child doesn't lie. Rachel Torres shot to her feet. Your Honor, we will contest the authenticity of this photograph at the appropriate time. The prosecution is presenting a one-sided narrative without allowing the defense to save it for cross-examination, counselor. The judge's voice was tired. His eyes lingered on Jasmine with something between pity and suspicion, the look of a man who had already made up his mind. Jasmine buried her face in her hands. This couldn't be happening. 4 weeks ago, she'd been tucking Sophie into bed, reading her favorite dinosaur book with roaring voices that made the little girl giggle. 4 weeks ago, Sophie had wrapped her small arms around Jasmine's neck and whispered, "I love you, Mommy Jasmine." Now she sat in a courtroom accused of beating that same child. Jasmine. Rachel's voice was low and urgent. You need to hold it together. Every tear makes you look unstable. The jury is watching. Let them watch. Jasmine's voice came out broken. Let them see what it looks like when an innocent woman loses everything. You haven't lost yet. Haven't I? Jasmine lifted her head, her swollen eyes scanning the gallery. Strangers stared back, some with disgust, others with cold curiosity. Not one face held compassion. Not one. She was already convicted in their minds. The prosecutor called his next witness. The people call Mrs. Dorothy Patterson. Jasmine's heart seized. Dorothy Patterson, the elderly woman who lived next door to the Thornton estate. The woman who used to wave at Jasmine and Sophie when they walked to the playground. The woman who once told Jasmine she was good with that child. Mrs. Patterson shuffled to the stand, adjusting her bifocals. She looked uncomfortable, her fingers fidgeting with the buttons of her cardigan. Mrs. Patterson, the prosecutor began, you live adjacent to the Thornton property, is that correct? Yes, 23 years now. And in that time, you've observed the defendant Jasmine Carter with the child? I have. Can you describe those observations? Mrs. Patterson hesitated. Her eyes darted toward Jasmine, then quickly away. She walked with Sophie often, took her to the park, seemed attentive. Seemed, well, Mrs. Patterson's voice dropped. You never really know what happens behind closed doors, do you? I heard the child cry sometimes, through the windows, at night. Jasmine's mouth fell open. She cried because she missed her mother. The words burst out before Rachel could stop her. She cried at thunderstorms. She cried at scraped knees, not because Miss Carter. The judge's face reddened. One more outburst and you will be held in contempt. Rachel pulled Jasmine back down, gripping her wrist. Stop. You're making it worse. But Jasmine couldn't stop shaking. The woman who had smiled at her for 3 years, who had complimented her patience, her kindness, was now implying she'd hurt Sophie. The prosecutor pressed forward. Mrs. Patterson, in your opinion, based on your observations, do you believe the defendant had the opportunity to harm the child? Objection. Rachel was on her feet. Calls for speculation. Sustained. But the damage was done. The jury had heard the question. The seed was planted. Mrs. Patterson was dismissed, and she hurried from the stand without looking at Jasmine once. The morning dragged on, each witness another nail in Jasmine's coffin. A pediatrician who examined Sophie testified that the bruise was consistent with blunt force trauma. A child psychologist suggested that children often protect their abusers out of misplaced loyalty. Through it all, Evelyn Pierce sat with perfect posture, her lips curled in a faint smile. Occasionally she whispered to Marcus, and each time his expression hardened further. Jasmine watched them, watched Evelyn's hand rest possessively on Marcus's arm, watched the way he leaned toward her, drinking in her words like a man dying of thirst. 6 months ago, Evelyn Pierce had swept into the Thornton household like a summer storm. Beautiful, elegant, impossible to ignore. Marcus had met her at a charity gala, and within weeks, she was a permanent fixture at the estate. From the beginning, something about her had made Jasmine uneasy. The way Evelyn's smile never reached her eyes. The way she looked at Sophie not with warmth, but with calculation, like the child was an obstacle to be managed. The way she slowly, systematically began inserting herself between Marcus and everyone else in his life. "You work too hard," Evelyn would tell Marcus over dinner, her hand covering his. "You should let the staff handle more. Delegate. Sophie doesn't need you hovering." And Marcus, still grieving his wife, still lost in the fog of sorrow and guilt, had listened. He stopped coming to Sophie's school events, stopped reading her bedtime stories, stopped noticing the way his daughter's eyes lit up whenever Jasmine walked into the room. Evelyn noticed. Oh, she noticed everything. "You're very attached to that child," Evelyn had said to Jasmine one afternoon, her voice silk-wrapped steel. They were alone in the kitchen, Sophie napping upstairs. Jasmine had looked up from the dishes. "She's a good girl, easy to love." Evelyn's eyes had narrowed. "Just remember, Jasmine, you're the help, not the family. Don't forget your place." The words had stung, but Jasmine had swallowed her response. She needed this job, needed the income to support her grandmother's medical bills, needed to stay close to Sophie, who had wrapped herself around Jasmine's heart like ivy on a trellis. But now, sitting in this courtroom, she wondered if Evelyn's warning had been more than condescension. It had been a threat. "The people call Sophie Thornton to the stand." Jasmine's blood turned to ice. The side door opened, and Sophie appeared, tiny, trembling, clutching her stuffed bunny so tightly its ears bent sideways. Her blonde curls were tied with a ribbon that matched her blue dress. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked terrified. Jasmine half rose from her seat. "Sophie?" Rachel yanked her down. "Don't, not now." Sophie was led to the witness chair. She had to sit on 2 phone books just to see over the edge of the stand. The bailiff offered to take her bunny, but she clutched it tighter, shaking her head. The prosecutor approached with exaggerated gentleness, crouching to meet her eye level. "Hi, Sophie. Do you remember me?" Sophie nodded barely. "Good girl. Now I'm going to ask you some questions, okay? And all you have to do is tell the truth. Can you do that?" Another nod. "Sophie, can you tell us what happened on the night you got that bruise on your face?" Sophie's lips trembled. Her eyes, those big blue innocent eyes, swept across the courtroom. They found Jasmine. And locked. Jasmine saw it then. The terror in Sophie's gaze. Not the terror of facing her abuser, something else. Something that looked like guilt, like shame, like a little girl carrying a secret too heavy for her small shoulders. "Sophie," the prosecutor prompted. "What happened that night?" Sophie looked down at her bunny. Her fingers twisted its worn ears. "Jasmine." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Speak up, sweetheart. It's okay." Sophie squeezed her eyes shut. "Jasmine hit me." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Ripples of reaction spread through the gallery, gasps, murmurs, the scratch of reporters' pens. Jasmine felt the room tilt. "No," she breathed. "No, baby. No. Jasmine hit me." Sophie repeated louder this time, but mechanical, rehearsed. "She got angry and she hit me." "You're doing so well, Sophie." The prosecutor's voice oozed false warmth. "Can you tell us why she hit you?" Sophie's lower lip quivered. A single tear slipped down her cheek. I don't remember." "That's okay. You've been very brave." The prosecutor turned to the jury, triumph flickering in his eyes. "No further questions." Jasmine was sobbing openly now, her whole body convulsing. "Sophie, please, tell them the truth. Please, baby, you know I never." "Silence." The gavel crashed down again and again. Bailiff, if the defendant cannot control herself, remove her from the courtroom. Rachel wrapped an arm around Jasmine, pulling her close, whispering urgently. Stop. You have to stop. You're destroying our case. But Jasmine couldn't hear her. All she could see was Sophie, her little girl, being led off the stand, her bunny pressed to her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. And behind Sophie, guiding her gently by the shoulder, was Evelyn Pierce. As they passed Jasmine's table, Evelyn leaned down to Sophie's ear. Jasmine couldn't hear the words, but she saw Sophie flinch, saw the child's eyes go dull with something that looked horribly like defeat. And in that moment, Jasmine understood. Sophie hadn't wanted to say those words. Someone had made her say them. Someone had coached her, threatened her, broken her. And that someone was walking out of the courtroom with a pearl necklace and a smile. The judge called a recess. The gavel echoed one final time as the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with gossip and judgment. Jasmine was led back to the holding room, her wrists in cuffs, her face streaked with tears. She could still hear the whispers following her down the marble hallway. Guilty. Monster. She should rot in prison. The door closed behind her, shutting out the noise. But nothing could shut out the image burned into her mind. Sophie's face crumpling as she spoke the lie. Rachel entered a moment later, closing the door softly. She set her files on the table and sat across from Jasmine. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Rachel said, "That child is scared of something, and it's not you." Jasmine looked up, eyes raw. "You believe me? I've defended guilty people, Jasmine. I know what guilt looks like." Rachel leaned forward. Sophie didn't look like a child testifying against her abuser. She looked like a child being controlled. Evelyn. The name came out like poison. She whispered something to Sophie. Right before she testified. Right after. She's behind all of this, Rachel. I know it. Knowing it and proving it are two different things. Then find a way to prove it. Jasmine slammed her palm on the table. That woman is destroying my life. She's using Sophie as a weapon, and no one can see it except me. Rachel was silent for a moment. Then she pulled a folder from her bag. There might be someone else who sees it. She slid a photograph across the table. A man in his 50s, graying at the temples, with the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much. Detective Samuel Warren. He was in the back of the courtroom today. He's been watching the trial. Why? Because he doesn't think the bruise in that photograph is real. Jasmine stared at her. What? Warren's investigated over 200 child abuse cases. He told me the bruise in the evidence photo doesn't look right to him. Too uniform. Too perfect. He thinks someone staged it. For the first time in weeks, something other than despair flickered in Jasmine's chest. Hope. Fragile, trembling, but alive. Can he prove it? He's working on it. He sent samples to the crime lab. If there's cosmetic residue on that photograph foundation adhesive, anything, he'll find it. Jasmine pressed her hands together, almost in prayer. How long? Days, maybe a week. I don't have a week, Rachel. You saw that jury. They've already made up their minds. Rachel reached across the table and gripped Jasmine's hands. Then we buy time. We poke holes. We cast doubt. Her eyes burned with determination. You didn't hurt that child, Jasmine. And I'm going to prove it, even if I have to tear Evelyn Pierce apart piece by piece to do it. Jasmine held her gaze. She wanted to believe. God, she wanted to believe. But as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the cold of the holding room seeped into her bones, she couldn't shake the image of Sophie's face. Those eyes. That fear. And the terrible question that haunted her. What had Evelyn done to that little girl to make her lie? That night, Jasmine lay on the thin mattress of her holding cell, staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent light hummed above her, never fully off, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. She counted the cracks in the concrete. 17. She'd counted them every night for 4 weeks. But tonight, her mind wasn't on the cracks. It was on Sophie. She closed her eyes and let herself remember. Not the courtroom, not the accusations, but the mornings. The real mornings before everything shattered. 3 years ago, Jasmine had driven her dented Chevy through the quiet Dallas suburbs at 5 a.m., the radio playing old Motown songs her grandmother used to love. She'd sung along, softly rehearsing joy before she even arrived at the Thornton estate. The mansion had intimidated her at first. All those windows, all that silence. But then she'd met Sophie. 2 years old, blonde curls wild from sleep, clutching a stuffed bunny that was already missing one eye. The little girl had looked up at Jasmine with those enormous blue eyes and said, "You pretty." And Jasmine's heart had cracked wide open. From that moment, Sophie became hers. Not by blood, not by law, but by something deeper, the kind of love that grows in the spaces between bedtime stories and scraped knees, between nightmare comfort and birthday candles. Marcus Thornton had barely been present. His wife had died 6 months before Jasmine arrived, and grief had hollowed him out. He wandered the mansion like a ghost, attending meetings, signing checks, occasionally standing in the doorway of Sophie's nursery with the lost expression of a man who'd forgotten how to be a father. Jasmine had filled the void. She'd fed Sophie heart-shaped pancakes every morning. She'd read dinosaur books with roaring voices that made the little girl shriek with laughter. She'd held her through thunderstorms, wiped her tears after bad dreams, taught her to tie her shoes and brush her teeth and say please and thank you. And one night, after a particularly bad nightmare, Sophie had wrapped her small arms around Jasmine's neck and whispered, "I wish you were my mommy." Jasmine had frozen. Tears pressed behind her eyes. But she hadn't corrected her. Instead, she'd kissed the child's hair and whispered back, "I've got you, baby. I've always got you." Now, lying in her cell, Jasmine pressed her palms to her face and sobbed. They were trying to take that away, trying to rewrite 3 years of love into a story of abuse, trying to turn her into a monster. And the worst part, the part that cut deepest, was that Sophie had helped them. Not willingly. Jasmine knew that. She'd seen the terror in Sophie's eyes, the mechanical way she'd recited those words. Someone had forced her, coached her, broken her. Evelyn. The name burned in Jasmine's chest like acid. She remembered the first time she'd seen Evelyn Pierce. 6 months ago, Marcus had brought her to the estate after a charity gala. Evelyn had glided through the front door in a red dress and diamonds, her smile perfect, her eyes sharp. Sophie had hidden behind Jasmine's legs. "Shy little thing, isn't she?" Evelyn had said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Jasmine had felt the hairs rise on the back of her neck. Something about Evelyn's gaze, the way she looked at Sophie, not with warmth, but with calculation, had triggered every protective instinct Jasmine possessed. But she'd said nothing. She was the help. It wasn't her place. Over the following months, Evelyn had inserted herself into the household like a virus. Slowly at first. Dinners with Marcus, weekends at the estate. Then she was there every day rearranging furniture, changing schedules, issuing orders to the staff with the authority of a woman who already considered herself mistress of the house. And always, always, she watched Jasmine. "You're very devoted to that child," Evelyn had said one afternoon. They were alone in the kitchen, Sophie napping upstairs. Evelyn's tone was light, but her eyes were ice. "She's easy to love," Jasmine had replied carefully. Evelyn had set down her wineglass. "Just remember your position, Jasmine. The help doesn't become family, no matter how much the child clings to you." The words had stung, but Jasmine had swallowed her response. She needed the job, needed to stay close to Sophie. Now she realized that hadn't been condescension. It had been the opening move of a war. Evelyn had seen Jasmine as a threat, not to her relationship with Marcus. No, Marcus barely noticed the help, but to something else. To Evelyn's control, her carefully constructed image of a perfect family. Sophie loved Jasmine more than she would ever love Evelyn, and Evelyn couldn't stand it. so she'd decided to eliminate the competition. Jasmine sat up in her cell, her hands trembling. The pieces were falling into place now. The bruise that appeared out of nowhere, the photographs, the coached testimony. Evelyn had painted that bruise on Sophie's face. She was certain of it. But certainty meant nothing without proof. Across the city in the Thornton mansion, Sophie lay curled in her bed. The covers were pulled to her chin, her bunny clutched against her chest. Moonlight slipped through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jasmine's face in the courtroom. The tears, the desperation, the way she'd cried out Sophie's name like it was a prayer. Sophie's stomach twisted with guilt so sharp it felt like a knife. She'd lied. She'd stood up in front of all those people and said terrible things about the person she loved most in the world. And now Jasmine might go away forever. Because of her. Sophie pressed her face into her bunny's fur, tears soaking through the worn fabric. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Jasmine." The door creaked open. Sophie froze. Evelyn's silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. She stood there for a moment watching, then glided into the room with silent steps. "Still awake, darling?" Sophie didn't answer. She squeezed her eyes shut, pretending to sleep. But Evelyn wasn't fooled. She sat on the edge of the bed, her perfume filling the air, jasmine and something colder, something sharp. "You did very well today," Evelyn said softly. Her hand stroked Sophie's hair. "Your father is so proud of you." Sophie's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw off the covers and run to her father and tell him everything, how Evelyn had painted the bruise on her cheek, how she'd made Sophie practice the lie over and over until the words felt like stones in her mouth, how she'd threatened that Jasmine would disappear forever if Sophie didn't cooperate. But fear held her paralyzed. Evelyn's voice dropped lower, her fingers tightening ever so slightly in Sophie's hair. "Remember what I told you, sweetheart? If you change your story, if you tell anyone the truth, they'll take Jasmine away, and you'll never see her again. Is that what you want?" Sophie shook her head, tears leaking from beneath her closed lids. "Good girl." Evelyn's hand relaxed. She leaned down and pressed a kiss to Sophie's forehead. Cold, precise, nothing like Jasmine's warm goodnight kisses. "Now go to sleep. Tomorrow is another big day." She rose and walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused. "Oh, and Sophie, if you ever try to tell anyone what really happened, I'll make sure your father sends you away to boarding school. Far away, where no one will ever believe you." The door closed with a soft click. Sophie lay in the darkness, shaking her bunny pressed to her mouth to muffle her sobs. Downstairs, Marcus Thornton sat alone in his study, a glass of bourbon untouched on the desk beside him. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the room in deep shadows. He couldn't stop thinking about Jasmine. Her voice in the courtroom, raw and desperate. Her eyes begging him to believe her. The way she'd said his name like he was the only person who could save her. And he'd looked away. He'd let Evelyn's hand anchor him to his seat, let her whispered words drown out the doubt screaming in his chest. But now in the silence of his study, the doubt returned. 3 years. Jasmine had been with them for 3 years. He'd watched her with Sophie countless times, seen the gentleness, the patience, the fierce protective love. He'd heard Sophie's laughter echoing through the halls, seen his daughter's face light up whenever Jasmine entered the room. Could a woman capable of that love really hurt a child? The photograph flashed in his mind. Sophie's bruised face, those wide, frightened eyes. His fists clenched. If Jasmine had hurt her, if she'd laid a hand on his daughter? But something didn't fit. Sophie had been acting strange since Evelyn arrived. Quieter, more withdrawn. She clung to Jasmine more desperately than ever, as if sensing a threat she couldn't name. And when Sophie had testified today, she hadn't looked at Jasmine with fear. She'd looked at Evelyn. Marcus reached for his bourbon, then stopped. His hand hovered over the glass, trembling slightly. What if he was wrong? What if Evelyn? Darling. He looked up. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her silk robe flowing behind her, her smile warm and concerned. You're still up. Is everything all right? Marcus forced his face into neutrality. Fine, just thinking. Evelyn crossed the room and perched on the arm of his chair, her hand sliding over his shoulder. You're troubled, I can tell. It's been a long day. It has. Her fingers traced patterns on his arm. But tomorrow will be easier. The prosecutor says closing arguments could be as early as next week. Then this whole nightmare will be over. Marcus didn't respond. Evelyn's hand stilled. You're not having second thoughts, are you? What? About Jasmine. Evelyn's voice hardened almost imperceptibly. You're not letting her tears get to you. She swore she didn't do it, Evelyn. She begged me to believe her. That's what guilty people do. Evelyn's tone was patient, as if explaining something to a child. They cry. They manipulate. They make you doubt what's right in front of your eyes. You saw the photograph, Marcus. You saw your daughter's face. I know, but nothing. Evelyn gripped his chin, turning his face toward hers. Her eyes bored into his. That woman hurt Sophie. She abused the trust you gave her, and now she's trying to escape the consequences by making you feel sorry for her. Don't let her win. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You're right. Of course I am. Evelyn kissed his forehead and rose. Now come to bed. You need rest. She walked toward the door, her robe trailing behind her like a queen's train. At the threshold, she paused. Oh, and Marcus. Try not to think about her anymore. Jasmine Carter will be out of our lives soon enough, permanently. She disappeared into the hallway, leaving Marcus alone with the dying fire and a glass of bourbon he couldn't bring himself to drink. The next morning, Rachel Torres arrived at the jail before dawn. She hadn't slept. Her apartment was a disaster of case files and coffee cups, but she'd found something, a thread so thin it might snap at any moment, but a thread nonetheless. Jasmine was brought to the visitor's room, her eyes swollen from another sleepless night. She sat heavily in the metal chair across from Rachel. Any news? Rachel slid a folder across the table. Detective Warren called me an hour ago. He sent the bruise photograph to a forensic lab for analysis. Independent. Off the record. Jasmine's hands trembled as she opened the folder. And the preliminary results are promising. Rachel leaned forward, lowering her voice. Warren says the bruise has characteristics inconsistent with blunt force trauma. The coloration is too uniform. The edges are too clean. And there are traces of synthetic material embedded in the image. Synthetic material. Makeup Jasmine. Foundation. Adhesive. Rachel's eyes burned with intensity. Warren thinks someone painted that bruise on Sophie's face. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. Evelyn, I knew it. I knew she... We don't have enough yet. Rachel held up a hand. Warren's still gathering evidence. He's requesting receipts from local pharmacies and cosmetic stores. If he can prove Evelyn purchased the specific products used to create that bruise, he will. He has to. Jasmine gripped the edge of the table. That woman is evil, Rachel. She's been manipulating Sophie, manipulating Marcus, destroying my life piece by piece, and no one sees it but me. Warren sees it. Rachel gathered the folder. And I'm starting to see it too. The question is whether we can make a jury see it before they convict you. How much time do we have? The prosecutor wants to wrap this up quickly. He knows his case is weaker than it looks, so he's pushing for closing arguments as soon as possible. We have maybe a week, possibly less. Jasmine closed her eyes. A week. 7 days to prove her innocence. 7 days to expose Evelyn's lies. 7 days before a jury decided whether she would spend the rest of her life in prison for a crime she didn't commit. What can I do? Rachel studied her for a moment. Right now, hold on. Don't give up. And trust me to do my job. Jasmine opened her eyes. That's not enough. It has to be. No. Jasmine's voice hardened. I've been passive this whole time, trusting the system, waiting for someone to save me. But the system is rigged, Rachel. It's designed to crush people like me, poor black invisible. If I don't fight back, I'm going to lose. Rachel was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. All right. What do you want to do? Sophie. Jasmine's eyes burned with determination. That child knows the truth. She tried to tell me in the courtroom. I saw it in her face. Evelyn's controlling her, threatening her, breaking her spirit. But Sophie is strong. Stronger than anyone gives her credit for. If we can reach her somehow, that's risky. Any contact with the victim could be construed as witness tampering. I'm not talking about contact. Jasmine leaned forward. I'm talking about giving Sophie a reason to be brave. She needs to know I haven't given up on her. She needs to know someone believes her. Rachel frowned. How? Jasmine thought for a moment. Then her eyes widened. The bunny. What? Sophie's stuffed bunny. She takes it everywhere, to school, to bed, to the courtroom. It's her security blanket, her best friend. When she's scared or upset, she talks to that bunny like it's a real person. Rachel's frown deepened. I'm not following. Sophie's birthday is in 4 days. I always made her a special card hand-drawn with hearts and dinosaurs and silly jokes. She kept every single one. Jasmine's voice cracked, but she pressed on. If there was a way to get her a card not from me directly but from somewhere else, she would know. She would understand that I'm still thinking about her, that I still believe in her, and maybe it would give her the courage to speak up. Rachel sat back considering. It's a long shot. Everything about this case is a long shot. True. Rachel tapped her fingers on the table. I might know someone who could help. A former client. She runs a children's charity. Sends birthday cards to kids in the hospital, foster care, that kind of thing. If she sent Sophie a card, no one could trace it back to me. Exactly. Rachel stood, gathering her things. I'll make some calls. But Jasmine, don't get your hopes up. Even if this works, it might not be enough. Jasmine met her gaze. It's not about enough. It's about fighting. Every way I can with everything I have. Until the very end. Rachel looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled. You know what, I'm starting to believe you might actually win this thing. She left the room, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Jasmine sat alone in the silence, her hands folded in her lap. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight on her chest felt slightly lighter. Not hope. Not quite. But something close. Across the city, Detective Samuel Warren sat at his desk, surrounded by evidence bags and coffee cups. His eyes were bloodshot. His tie loosened, his chin rough with 2 days of stubble. He'd been a cop for 20 years. He'd seen things that would break most people: child murders, domestic horrors, the worst of human nature laid bare. He'd learned to compartmentalize, to do the job without letting it consume him. But this case was different. Something about Maya Jasmine had gotten under his skin. The way she'd sobbed in the courtroom. The way she'd looked at that little girl with pure, desperate love. The way everyone had already decided she was guilty before a single piece of real evidence was presented. Warren had seen guilty people before. He knew the signs. The shifty eyes. The rehearsed answers. The subtle tells that betrayed deception. Jasmine Carter didn't have any of them, but that photograph did. He pulled it up on his computer screen for the 100th time, zooming in on the bruise. He'd spent hours studying it, comparing it to real injuries he'd documented over the years. Bike accidents, falls, abuse cases where the bruise patterns told their own terrible stories. This bruise was wrong. Too perfect, too symmetrical. the coloration too uniform from edge to edge. Real bruises were messy. They spread unevenly as blood pooled beneath the skin. They changed color at different rates depending on the depth of the tissue damage. This one looked painted. And then there was the glitter. He'd spotted it during his third review of the photograph, tiny particles catching the light at the edge of the bruise. Synthetic. Unnatural. The kind of thing you'd find in cheap cosmetics. He'd sent samples to a private lab, calling in favors from his forensics days. The preliminary results had confirmed his suspicions. Traces of foundation adhesive and synthetic mica, the glitter compound used in shimmer makeup. Someone had manufactured this injury. And Warren had a pretty good idea who. He pulled up Evelyn Pierce's file on his screen. Socialite. Former model. Currently dating Marcus Thornton, billionaire widower and father of the alleged victim. She'd moved into the Thornton household 6 months ago, right around the time Sophie started showing signs of anxiety and withdrawal, according to school reports Warren had quietly obtained. Coincidence. Warren didn't believe in coincidences. He'd also obtained pharmacy records. Not legally, not yet, but through a contact who owed him a favor. The record showed that Evelyn had purchased theatrical-grade concealer and skin adhesive 2 days before the bruise appeared on Sophie's face. It was circumstantial. Not enough for an arrest. Not enough to overturn the case. But it was a start. Warren picked up his phone and dialed Rachel Torres. "It's Warren. I've got something. Meet me tomorrow 7 a.m. and bring your client's hope. She's going to need it." He hung up and stared at the photograph one more time. "I see you, Evelyn Pierce," he muttered. "And I'm coming for you." At the Thornton mansion, morning light flooded through the tall windows, but no warmth came with it. The breakfast table was set with silver and crystal, but Sophie hadn't touched her eggs. She pushed them around her plate, her eyes fixed on nothing. Marcus watched her from across the table, concern creasing his forehead. "Sophie, you need to eat something." She didn't respond. Evelyn swept into the room fresh and perfect in a cream blouse and pearls. She kissed Marcus on the cheek, then turned to Sophie with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, darling. How did you sleep?" Sophie's fork froze mid-motion. "She's tired," Marcus said. "This whole thing has been hard on her." "Of course it has." Evelyn sat down, smoothing a napkin across her lap. "But it's almost over. Soon everything will be back to normal, and we can put this unpleasantness behind us." Sophie looked up suddenly. Her voice was small, but sharp. "Where's Jasmine?" The table went silent. Evelyn's smile tightened. "We've discussed this, sweetheart. Jasmine isn't coming back." "Why not?" "Because she's not good for you." Evelyn's tone was patient, but her eyes flashed with warning. "She's not the person you thought she was." "Yes, she is." Sophie's voice rose. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. "She is good. She's the best. She loves me, and she never hurt me, and I want her to come home." Marcus set down his coffee cup. "Sophie, she didn't do it, Daddy." Tears spilled down Sophie's cheeks. "She never hit me. She never hurt me. I lied because—" "That's enough." Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip. She rose from her chair, her face pale with fury. "Sophie, go to your room, now." Sophie shrank back, her outburst dying in her throat. She looked at her father, pleading desperate. "Daddy, please, believe me, please." Marcus stared at his daughter. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Evelyn stepped between them, blocking his view of Sophie. "She's confused, Marcus. The trauma has affected her memory. This is exactly what the psychologist warned about children creating false narratives to protect their abusers. We need to stay strong." Marcus looked at Evelyn, then past her to Sophie's tear-streaked face. For a long, terrible moment, he wavered. Then he looked down at his coffee cup. "Go to your room, Sophie," he said quietly. "We'll talk about this later." Sophie's face crumbled. She pushed back from the table, grabbed her bunny and ran. Her footsteps echoed up the stairs. A door slammed. And in the dining room, Evelyn sat back down, smoothed her napkin, and smiled. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "The sooner this is over, the sooner she'll heal." Marcus nodded slowly, but his hands hidden beneath the table were shaking. Upstairs, Sophie threw herself onto her bed and sobbed into her bunny. She'd tried. She'd finally tried to tell the truth, and no one had listened. No one believed her. She was alone. Completely, terrifyingly alone. "I'm sorry, Jasmine," she whispered into the bunny's worn fur. "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough. I'm sorry I couldn't save you." She cried until exhaustion pulled her under her small body curled around the only friend she had left. And somewhere in her dreams, she heard Jasmine's voice singing the lullaby she always sang at bedtime. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Sophie clung to the sound even as the darkness closed in around her, even as the lies tightened their grip, even as hope slipped further and further away. 4 days later, Sophie woke to find a pink envelope on her nightstand. She blinked at it, confused. Her room was empty. The door was closed. But there, it was a birthday card, her name written across the front, in looping cursive. Sophie sat up slowly, her heart pounding. Today was her birthday. She was 6 years old, but no one had mentioned it. Not Daddy, not Evelyn. The house had been silent all morning, the staff moving through their duties like ghosts. She reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. It wasn't from Daddy, his handwriting was sharp and slanted. It wasn't from Evelyn, she would never use pink. Sophie tore it open. Inside was a card with a hand-drawn dinosaur wearing a party hat. Hearts surrounded it. Silly stars. And at the bottom, in familiar handwriting that made Sophie's chest ache. "To my brave girl, I believe in you, always. Love forever, your Mommy J." Sophie pressed the card to her chest and sobbed. Jasmine hadn't forgotten. Jasmine still loved her. Jasmine was still out there somewhere believing in her. The guilt that had been crushing Sophie for weeks twisted into something else, something fiercer, something that felt almost like courage. She wiped her eyes and looked at the dinosaur again. Jasmine always drew dinosaurs on her birthday cards, always with party hats, always with the same message, "Be brave, little roar." Sophie climbed out of bed, still clutching the card. She walked to her mirror and stared at her reflection. Small pale eyes red from crying, but also determined. "I can be brave," she whispered. "I can be brave like Jasmine said." She hid the card under her mattress, pressing it flat so no one would find it. Then she got dressed, brushed her hair, and went downstairs. Evelyn was waiting in the dining room, a small cake in front of her, with 6 candles. Marcus sat beside her, his smile strained, his eyes tired. "Happy birthday, darling," Evelyn said smoothly. "Make a wish." Sophie stared at the candles. The flames flickered, casting shadows across Evelyn's face. She closed her eyes. "I wish for Jasmine to come home." She blew out the candles in one breath. Evelyn clapped politely. Marcus squeezed Sophie's shoulder. But neither of them noticed the change in the little girl's eyes, the spark that hadn't been there before. The spark of a child who had finally decided to fight back. At the Dallas County Jail, Jasmine sat across from Rachel in the visitor's room. Rachel's face was different today, brighter, more alive. She slid a folder across the table. Warren came through. Jasmine's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were lab reports, receipts, photographs. Her eyes scanned the pages, not understanding half of what she read. "What does this mean?" "It means the bruise was fake." Rachel leaned forward, her voice barely contained. "The lab found cosmetic foundation adhesive compound and synthetic glitter particles embedded in the photograph. The bruise wasn't caused by trauma. It was painted on." Jasmine's breath caught. "I knew it. I knew she—" "There's more." Rachel pointed to a receipt. Warren obtained purchase records from a pharmacy near the Thornton estate. 3 days before Sophie's alleged injury, Evelyn Pierce bought theatrical-grade concealer, skin, adhesive, and setting powder. The same products identified in the lab analysis. Oh my God. It gets better. Rachel's eyes gleamed. Warren also found a witness, a delivery driver who dropped off a package at the Thornton mansion the afternoon the bruise appeared. He remembers seeing Evelyn in the upstairs window with Sophie, and he remembers thinking it was strange because Sophie was crying and trying to pull away. Jasmine pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She did it. She really did it. She painted that bruise on my baby's face. And we can prove it. Rachel gathered the folder. Warren is testifying tomorrow. We're going to destroy Evelyn's case piece by piece. What about Sophie? Will she have to testify again? Rachel hesitated. That's up to the judge. But honestly, after what Warren presents, we might not need her. The physical evidence alone should be enough to create reasonable doubt. Jasmine shook her head fiercely. It's not about reasonable doubt. I want Sophie to know the truth came out. I want her to know she doesn't have to carry this anymore. Rachel studied her for a long moment. You really love that child. More than my own life. Then trust me to fight for her. For both of you. Rachel stood straightening her jacket. Get some rest tonight, Jasmine. Tomorrow, everything changes. She left the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Jasmine sat alone in the silence, her heart pounding with something she barely recognized. Hope. Real hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, she allowed herself to believe it might actually end. That night at the Thornton mansion, Evelyn paced the length of Marcus's study. Her usual composure had cracked. Her hands shook as she poured herself a drink. They're coming after me. Marcus looked up from his desk. What? That detective, Warren. He's been digging. Evelyn's voice was sharp, brittle. He requested pharmacy records. He's been questioning witnesses. He's trying to build a case against me. Marcus frowned. Against you? For what? Evelyn's laugh was harsh. Don't be naive, Marcus. He thinks I faked Sophie's injury. He thinks I framed your precious Maid. Marcus went very still. Did you? Excuse me. Did you fake it? Marcus rose slowly from his chair. His voice was quiet, but something dangerous lurked beneath the surface. Did you paint that bruise on my daughter's face? Evelyn stared at him. For a fraction of a second her mask slipped, and Marcus saw something cold and calculating in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by wounded outrage. How dare you? After everything I've done for you, for Sophie, how dare you accuse me of something so monstrous? I'm not accusing, I'm asking. And the fact that you have to ask tells me everything. Evelyn slammed her glass down. I thought you trusted me, Marcus. I thought we were building something together. But apparently, you'd rather believe a maid's lies than stand by the woman who loves you. Marcus didn't move. Sophie said something the other day, at breakfast. She said Jasmine never hurt her. She said she lied. Children say all kinds of things when they're confused. She didn't look confused. She looked terrified. Marcus stepped closer. Of you. Evelyn's face went white. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Evelyn straightened her shoulders and smiled a cold, brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. Be careful, Marcus. You're about to make a very big mistake. Am I? If you turn on me, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of father you really are. Absent. Negligent. So buried in your work that you handed your daughter to the help and didn't notice when she started calling another woman Mommy. Evelyn's voice dropped to a hiss. The press will destroy you. Your reputation, your business, everything you've built. Is that what you want? Marcus's jaw tightened. Get out. What? Get out of my house. Tonight. Evelyn laughed a sharp, ugly sound. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. Marcus walked to the door and opened it. Pack your things. I want you gone within the hour. Evelyn didn't move. Her eyes burned with fury. "You're going to regret this, Marcus. You have no idea what I'm capable of." "I'm starting to figure it out." For a long, terrible moment, they stared at each other. Then Evelyn swept past him, her shoulder brushing his, hard enough to leave a bruise. She disappeared up the stairs, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble. Marcus stood in the doorway, his heart pounding, his hands shaking. He'd done it. He'd finally done it. Now he just had to pray it wasn't too late. Upstairs, Sophie lay awake in bed, listening to the raised voices below. She couldn't make out the words, but she recognized the tone, anger, accusation, something breaking apart. Then footsteps in the hallway. Her door flew open. Evelyn stood silhouetted against the light, her face twisted with rage. "You little brat!" Sophie scrambled backward, pressing against her headboard. "I didn't do anything. Don't lie to me." Evelyn crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Sophie's arm. "What did you tell your father? What did you say?" "Nothing. I didn't say anything." "Liar." Evelyn shook her hard. "You've been poisoning him against me from the start. You and that precious maid of yours. Well, it's not going to work. Do you hear me? I won't let you." "Let go of her." Marcus's voice thundered from the doorway. Evelyn spun around. Sophie wrenched free and scrambled off the bed, running to her father. Marcus caught her in his arms, his face white with shock and fury. He stared at Evelyn over his daughter's head. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "She's manipulating you, Marcus. Can't you see that she's—" "I said get out." Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. "Now, before I call the police." Evelyn's face contorted. For a moment she looked like she might launch herself at them both. Then she composed herself, drew a breath, smoothed her hair. "Fine." Her voice was ice. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." She walked out of the room with her head high as if she were leaving a party that had grown tedious. Marcus held Sophie tightly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Daddy." Sophie's voice was muffled against his chest. "Is she gone?" "Yes, baby. She's gone. Forever." Marcus closed his eyes. Guilt crashed over him in waves, guilt for not seeing sooner, for not protecting his daughter, for letting Evelyn into their lives in the first place. "Forever," he whispered. "I promise." Sophie pulled back and looked up at him, her eyes red but bright. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart." "Jasmine didn't hurt me." Marcus's throat tightened. "I know." "Evelyn made me lie. She painted the bruise on my face. She said if I told the truth, Jasmine would go away forever, and I'd never see her again." Tears spilled down Marcus's cheeks. He sank to his knees, holding his daughter's face in his hands. "I'm so sorry, Sophie. I'm so sorry I didn't listen. I should have believed you. I should have—" Sophie wrapped her small arms around his neck. "It's okay, Daddy. You believe me now." And Marcus held her, rocking back and forth, sobbing with relief and shame, and a fierce, burning determination to make things right. Whatever it took. The next morning, the courthouse was chaos. News had leaked overnight that Detective Warren would be presenting evidence challenging the prosecution's case. Reporters swarmed the steps. Cameras flashed. Speculation ran wild. Jasmine was escorted in through the side entrance, but even there she could hear the commotion. Her heart raced as Rachel met her at the defense table. "Warren's ready," Rachel said, her eyes bright. "And there's something else." "What?" "Marcus Thornton is here. He asked to speak to the judge before the session starts." Jasmine's blood went cold. "Marcus. Why?" "I don't know yet. But from what I hear, Evelyn was thrown out of the mansion last night. Something happened." Before Jasmine could respond, the bailiff called the court to order. The judge entered. The gallery fell silent. But the first person to rise wasn't the prosecutor or the defense. It was Marcus Thornton. "Your Honor, I need to address the court." The judge frowned. "Mr. Thornton, this is highly irregular. The prosecution—" "Please." Marcus's voice cracked. I have information that changes everything. I need to be heard." The judge studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Approach." Marcus walked to the front of the courtroom. Every eye followed him. Jasmine's hands gripped the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Marcus turned to face the gallery. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "I made a terrible mistake," he began, his voice unsteady. "I accused an innocent woman of hurting my daughter. I let fear and grief cloud my judgment. I trusted someone I shouldn't have, and I failed to see what was right in front of me." The courtroom buzzed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Marcus's eyes found Jasmine's across the room. "Jasmine Carter never hurt Sophie. She loved my daughter, loves her still more than I ever deserved. For 3 years, she was the mother Sophie needed when I was too broken to be a father, and I repaid that love by standing silent while she was torn apart." His voice broke. He drew a shaky breath. "Last night, my daughter told me the truth. She told me that Evelyn Pierce, the woman I was involved with, painted the bruise on Sophie's face. She coached Sophie to lie. She threatened her. She manipulated all of us to destroy an innocent woman." Gasps erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Marcus continued, his voice rising. "I'm asking this court to dismiss the charges against Jasmine Carter. I'm asking for a full investigation into Evelyn Pierce. And I'm asking—" He stopped, his voice catching. "I'm asking Jasmine to forgive me. For everything." The courtroom exploded. Jasmine sat, frozen, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. After weeks of being called a monster, a child beater, a criminal, Marcus Thornton was standing in open court and declaring her innocent. Rachel gripped her arm. "Jasmine, Jasmine, are you okay?" Jasmine couldn't answer. Her eyes were locked on Marcus, who stood with his head bowed, waiting for judgment. The judge called for order, his gavel cracking again and again. "Mr. Thornton, these are serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support them?" "Detective Warren has evidence, Your Honor. Physical evidence that the bruise was manufactured. And my daughter is prepared to testify truthfully about what really happened." The judge turned to the prosecution. "Counselor." The prosecutor was white-faced, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Your Honor, we need time to—" "The people will have time to respond," the judge said firmly. "But given the gravity of these claims, I'm ordering an immediate recess while Detective Warren's evidence is reviewed. If it corroborates Mr. Thornton's statement, we will revisit the charges against Miss Carter." He turned to Jasmine, his expression softening. "Miss Carter, you will remain in custody until this matter is resolved. But based on what I've heard today, that resolution may come sooner than expected." The gavel fell one final time. The courtroom erupted into chaos as reporters rushed for the exits, shouting questions, fighting for position. But Jasmine didn't notice. She was staring at Marcus, who stood alone at the front of the room, tears streaming down his face. Their eyes met. And in that moment, something passed between them, not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first fragile thread of understanding. Marcus mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." Jasmine couldn't respond. The bailiff was already moving toward her, ready to escort her back to holding. But as she stood, Rachel leaned close. "This is it, Jasmine. We're going to win." Jasmine closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. Win. She'd almost forgotten what that word meant, but now, for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe it. The afternoon stretched long and agonizing. Jasmine sat in the holding room waiting. Every footstep in the hallway made her heart jump. Every muffled voice made her strain to listen. Finally, the door opened. Rachel entered, her face flushed, her eyes bright. Warren's evidence was conclusive. The judge reviewed everything: the lab reports, the pharmacy receipts, the witness statements. Combined with Marcus's testimony and his willingness to let Sophie tell the truth. She paused, drawing a breath. "The charges are being dropped, Jasmine. You're free." Jasmine stared at her. The words didn't register. Couldn't register. After weeks of terror, weeks of humiliation, weeks of feeling her life crumble to dust, Free. Her voice was barely a whisper. Rachel nodded, tears spilling down her own cheeks. Free. It's over. You won. Jasmine's legs gave out. She slid to the floor, sobbing, her hands pressed to her face. 3 years of love. 4 weeks of hell. And now, Sophie. She gasped. Where's Sophie? I need to see her. She's at the courthouse. Marcus brought her. She's been asking for you all day. Jasmine scrambled to her feet, wiping her eyes. Take me to her, please. Take me to my baby. Rachel smiled through her tears. Let's go bring you home. The hallway outside the courtroom was still crowded with reporters and spectators. Cameras flashed, questions flew. But Jasmine didn't see any of it. She saw only Sophie. The little girl stood at the end of the hall clutching her bunny, her face pale and anxious. Marcus stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. The moment Sophie saw Jasmine, her face crumpled. Jasmine. She broke free from her father and ran small legs, pumping bunny-flying blonde curls, streaming behind her. Jasmine dropped to her knees and caught her. Sophie slammed into her arms, nearly knocking her backward. They clung to each other, sobbing, rocking back and forth in the middle of the crowded hallway while the world watched. I'm sorry, Sophie wailed. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I said those things. I didn't mean it. I love you. Please don't be mad at me. Jasmine pressed her lips to Sophie's hair, tears streaming. Shh, baby. Shh. I could never be mad at you. Never. You were so brave. You told the truth. That's all that matters. I was scared. I know, baby. I know. She made me say it. She said you'd go away forever. I'm not going anywhere. Jasmine pulled back, cupping Sophie's face in her hands. I'm right here, and I'm never leaving you again. Do you hear me? Never. Sophie threw her arms around Jasmine's neck and squeezed with all her strength. I love you, Mommy Jasmine. The words shattered something inside Jasmine, shattered it, and rebuilt it at the same time. I love you too, baby, more than anything in this world. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, while the cameras flashed, and the reporters shouted, and the world kept spinning around them. Finally, Jasmine looked up. Marcus stood a few feet away, his face wet with tears, his hands hanging at his sides. He looked lost, broken, like a man who had finally woken up from a terrible dream and didn't know how to find his way back. Jasmine rose slowly, keeping Sophie's hand in hers. Marcus? Jasmine, His voice cracked. I don't know what to say. Sorry isn't enough. Nothing is enough. I should have believed you. I should have protected you. Instead, Stop. Jasmine held up her hand. Not here. Not now. This isn't about us. She looked down at Sophie, who was gazing up at her with tear-bright eyes. This is about her. It's always been about her. Marcus nodded slowly. I know. And I swear to you, I swear on everything I have, I will spend the rest of my life making this right. For both of you. Jasmine studied him for a long moment. The man who had looked away when she begged for his trust. The man who had let Evelyn poison his mind. The man who had almost destroyed her. But also the man who had finally stood up, who had told the truth, who had chosen his daughter over his pride. Don't make promises to me, Jasmine said quietly. Make them to her. She stepped aside, giving Marcus space. He knelt in front of Sophie, taking her small hands in his. Sophie, I'm so sorry. I didn't listen when you tried to tell me the truth. I let someone bad into our lives, and I didn't protect you the way a father should. But I'm going to do better. I promise. From now on, I'm going to be the daddy you deserve. Sophie looked at him with eyes far too old for a 6-year-old. Do you promise to listen next time? I promise. Do you promise to believe me? Always. Sophie glanced at Jasmine, then back at her father. Do you promise Jasmine can stay? Marcus's breath caught. He looked up at Jasmine, his eyes pleading. If she'll have us, he said softly. After everything, if she's willing to give us another chance. Sophie turned to Jasmine, her face hopeful. "Will you? Mommy, Jasmine? Will you come home?" Jasmine's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. She knelt down, gathering Sophie close. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away, baby. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The courthouse hallway slowly emptied as reporters rushed to file their stories and spectators drifted away buzzing with the drama they'd witnessed. But Jasmine, Sophie, and Marcus remained a small island of stillness in the receding chaos. Rachel approached her heels clicking against the marble floor. Her face was serious despite the victory. "Jasmine, there's something you should know." Jasmine straightened, keeping Sophie's hand firmly in hers. "What is it?" "Evelyn's been arrested. Detective Warren picked her up an hour ago at her apartment. She's being charged with perjury, obstruction of justice, and child endangerment." Sophie's grip tightened. "She can't hurt us anymore." Rachel knelt to Sophie's level, her voice gentle. "No, sweetheart. She can't hurt anyone anymore." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. "What happens now?" "Now we go to trial. But this time, Evelyn's the defendant." Rachel stood, straightening her jacket. "Warren's evidence is rock solid. The lab reports, the pharmacy receipts, the delivery driver's statement. Combined with Sophie's testimony and your statement, Marcus, she doesn't have a chance." "I want to testify," Jasmine said suddenly. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to. The case against her is already strong." "I know, but I need to." Jasmine's jaw set. "I need to face her. I need her to see me standing there free while she answers for what she did." Rachel studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll make it happen." Sophie tugged at Jasmine's hand. "Can we go home now? I'm tired." Jasmine looked at Marcus. The question hung between them, unspoken, but heavy. Home. What did that word even mean anymore? Marcus cleared his throat. "Jasmine, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but Sophie needs you, and truthfully so do I. Would you consider coming back, not as an employee, as family?" Jasmine's heart clenched. 4 weeks ago, this man had stood silent while she was dragged away in handcuffs. He'd believed Evelyn's lies. He'd let her face a jury alone. But he'd also stood up in open court and admitted his mistakes. He'd thrown Evelyn out. He'd chosen his daughter. People could change. Jasmine had to believe that. Otherwise, what was the point of any of it? "Let's take it one day at a time," she said finally. "Sophie comes first. Everything else, we'll figure out." Marcus nodded, relief and gratitude flooding his features. "One day at a time. I can work with that." Sophie grinned, the first real smile Jasmine had seen on her face in weeks. "Does that mean you're coming home with us?" Jasmine squeezed her hand. "For tonight, baby. We'll see about tomorrow." "That's what you always say." "And I'm always right, aren't I?" Sophie giggled, and the sound was like music after a long silence. They walked out of the courthouse together into the fading afternoon light. Reporters shouted questions from behind barriers. Cameras flashed. But Jasmine kept her eyes forward, her hand wrapped around Sophie's, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She was free. But more importantly, Sophie was safe. And for now, that was enough. The drive to the Thornton estate was quiet. Sophie fell asleep in the back seat. Within minutes, her bunny clutched to her chest, her head resting against Jasmine's shoulder. The exhaustion of the past weeks had finally caught up with her. Marcus drove, his eyes fixed on the road. Every few minutes he glanced in the rearview mirror at Jasmine. "I keep thinking about what I should have done differently," he said finally, his voice low so as not to wake Sophie. Jasmine didn't respond immediately. She stroked Sophie's hair, watching the familiar streets pass by. "You should have believed me." "I know." "You should have believed your daughter." "I know that too." "Then why didn't you?" Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I was scared. When I saw that photograph, Sophie's face, the bruise, something in me just shut down. All I could think was that I'd failed her, Again. First her mother, then this. I needed someone to blame. So you blamed me? Yes. His voice cracked. And I'll never forgive myself for it. Jasmine looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Evelyn knew exactly what she was doing, she said quietly. She knew you were vulnerable. She knew how to manipulate you. She played us all. That doesn't excuse what I did. No, it doesn't. Jasmine turned to face him. But you're not the only one who made mistakes. I should have spoken up sooner. I knew something was wrong with Evelyn from the first day she walked into that house. I felt it. But I stayed quiet because I needed the job, because I didn't want to rock the boat, because I told myself it wasn't my place. Marcus met her eyes in the mirror. You were trying to protect yourself. I was trying to survive. But maybe if I'd said something, no. Marcus shook his head firmly. This isn't your fault, Jasmine. None of it. You did everything right. You loved Sophie. You cared for her. You were the mother she needed when I was too broken to be a father. The only person responsible for what happened is Evelyn. Jasmine was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Then let's make sure she pays for it. They pulled through the gates of the Thornton estate as darkness fell. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows glowing with warm light. Staff members peered through curtains, curious about the return of the woman who'd been dragged away in handcuffs just weeks ago. Jasmine carried Sophie inside the little girl still deeply asleep. She climbed the familiar stairs, walked down the familiar hallway, and pushed open the door to Sophie's room. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The stuffed animals arranged on the shelf. The crayon drawings taped to the walls. The nightlight shaped like a star casting soft patterns across the ceiling. Jasmine laid Sophie gently on the bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. She tucked the bunny beside her, then leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Sleep tight, baby. I'll be here when you wake up. Sophie stirred slightly, her lips curving into a smile. Promise? I promise. Jasmine watched her for a long moment, her heart so full it ached. Then she quietly left the room, leaving the door cracked open the way Sophie liked. Marcus was waiting in the hallway. Is she okay? She's exhausted, but she'll be fine. Jasmine leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of her own fatigue. We all will be, eventually. Marcus nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but the words wouldn't come. Get some rest, Jasmine said finally. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. What about you? I'll stay in the guest room, if that's still okay. Of course it is. This is your home, Jasmine. It always has been. She met his eyes, searching for something, sincerity perhaps, or the promise that things would be different now. She found both. Good night, Marcus. Good night, Jasmine. She walked down the hall toward the guest room, her footsteps soft on the carpet. At the door she paused and looked back. Marcus was still standing outside Sophie's room, his hand resting on the doorframe, his eyes fixed on his sleeping daughter. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked like a father. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of depositions, interviews, and legal proceedings. Detective Warren worked tirelessly building the case against Evelyn piece by piece. Rachel coordinated with the prosecutor's office, ensuring that every scrap of evidence was properly documented and preserved. And through it all, Jasmine stood firm. She testified in pre-trial hearings, recounting Evelyn's subtle cruelties, the whispered threats, the way she'd slowly isolated Sophie from everyone who loved her. She answered questions with calm precision, refusing to let the defense attorneys shake her composure. Miss Carter, the defense lawyer said during one particularly grueling session, isn't it true that you harbored resentment toward Miss Pierce because she was romantically involved with Mr. Thornton? Jasmine met his gaze evenly. No. You didn't feel threatened by her presence in the household. I felt concerned for Sophie. From the first day Miss Pierce arrived, that child became withdrawn and anxious. I didn't understand why at the time. Now I do. But surely you can understand why some might view your accusations as motivated by jealousy. I can understand a lot of things. Jasmine interrupted, her voice steady. I can understand that powerful people sometimes get away with terrible things because no one wants to believe the truth. I can understand that it's easier to blame the maid than the socialite. But that doesn't change what happened. Evelyn Pierce painted a bruise on a 5-year-old's face and coached her to lie. She tried to send an innocent woman to prison. Those are facts, not feelings. The defense attorney had no further questions. Sophie also testified, this time with a child advocate beside her and Marcus in the gallery. Her voice was small but clear as she described what Evelyn had done. The makeup, the threats, the whispered warnings that if she told the truth, Jasmine would disappear forever. Were you scared? The prosecutor asked gently. Sophie nodded. Really scared. Why didn't you tell anyone sooner? Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Because I didn't want Jasmine to go away. Evelyn said if I told I'd never see her again. And Jasmine is my mommy Jasmine. I can't lose her. The courtroom was silent. Jasmine, seated in the gallery beside Rachel, wiped tears from her cheeks. You were very brave, Sophie, the prosecutor said. Thank you for telling the truth. Sophie looked toward the gallery, found Jasmine's face, and smiled. Jasmine taught me to be brave. She said the truth is like a dinosaur. It's big and scary, but it always wins. A few people in the gallery laughed softly. Even the judge's lips twitched. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. Evelyn's defense was crumbling. Her lawyers had tried everything, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, suggesting that Sophie had been coached by Jasmine, arguing that the pharmacy receipts proved nothing. But Detective Warren's testimony destroyed each argument systematically. The lab analysis, the timeline, the delivery driver's statement, the pattern of manipulation that stretched back months. And then there was Marcus. He took the stand on the third day of the trial, his face pale but determined. He answered questions about his relationship with Evelyn, about her integration into the household, about the subtle ways she'd driven wedges between him and everyone else in his life. Mr. Thornton, the prosecutor said, when did you first suspect that something was wrong? Marcus was silent for a long moment. The night I threw her out. Sophie tried to tell me the truth at breakfast, but Evelyn shut her down. Later that night, I overheard Evelyn in Sophie's room. She was threatening her, telling her to keep quiet. That's when I knew. And what did you do? I told her to leave. She refused at first, got angry, said she'd ruin me if I turned against her. Marcus's voice hardened. Then she went into Sophie's room and grabbed her, shook her. That's when I knew for certain everything Jasmine had been saying was true. What happened next? I kicked her out. Then I held my daughter while she cried and told me everything. Marcus's voice broke. She told me Evelyn had painted the bruise. She told me Evelyn had made her lie. She told me she was sorry over and over for saying those things about Jasmine. He looked toward the gallery, finding Jasmine's eyes. My daughter was the bravest person in that house. She carried a burden no child should ever have to carry. And she did it to protect someone she loved. Jasmine's tears fell freely now. Beside her, Rachel squeezed her hand. The prosecutor nodded. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. No further questions. The defense declined to cross-examine. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon, just over 2 weeks after Jasmine's charges had been dropped. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back rows. Community members who had once called Jasmine a monster now sat in silent anticipation. Evelyn Pierce sat at the defendant's table, her composure finally broken. Her hair was limp. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. She looked like a woman who had finally run out of lies. The judge entered. The gallery rose, then settled. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of perjury, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice. Guilty. On the charge of child endangerment. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Evelyn's face went white. Her lawyer placed a steadying hand on her arm, but she shook it off. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "I demand an appeal. I demand—" "Miss Pierce, you will be silent," the judge said firmly. "Sentencing will be scheduled for 3 weeks from today. Until then, you will be remanded to custody." Bailiffs moved toward Evelyn. She stood, her eyes sweeping the courtroom with wild fury. They landed on Jasmine. "You think you've won?" Evelyn's voice was poison. "You think this changes anything? You're still just the help. You'll always be just the help. You don't belong in their world. You never will." Jasmine rose slowly. Her voice was calm, steady, utterly unshakable. "You're right about one thing, Evelyn. I don't belong in your world. Your world is built on lies, manipulation, and hurting children. I want no part of it." She stepped into the aisle, meeting Evelyn's glare without flinching. "But Sophie's world, that's different. Her world is built on love, on truth, on the kind of courage a 6-year-old taught a grown woman when nobody else would." Jasmine smiled a small, fierce smile. "And in that world I belong. I always have." Evelyn's face twisted with impotent rage. The bailiffs took her arms, guiding her toward the side door. "This isn't over," she screamed. "You'll regret this. All of you." The door closed behind her, cutting off her voice mid-shriek. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Spectators burst into applause. Rachel threw her arms around Jasmine, laughing and crying at the same time. "We did it," Rachel said. "My God, we actually did it." Jasmine hugged her back, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "We did. We really did." Through the crowd, she saw Sophie running toward her blonde curls, flying bunny, abandoned somewhere in her wake. Marcus followed close behind, his face split in a grin. Sophie launched herself at Jasmine, who caught her and swung her around. "Is the bad lady going away forever?" Sophie asked breathlessly. "Yes, baby. She's going away for a long, long time." "Because she told lies?" "That's right. Because she told lies and tried to hurt people." Sophie's face grew serious. "Lying is bad." "The worst," Jasmine agreed. "But you know what's the opposite of bad?" "What?" "You. You're the bravest, strongest, most wonderful little girl in the whole world. And I am so, so proud of you." Sophie beamed. "I'm proud of you too, Mommy Jasmine." Marcus reached them slightly out of breath. His eyes were bright. "I don't know how to thank you both," he said to Rachel and Jasmine. "Everything you did—" "Don't thank me," Rachel interrupted. "Thank Sophie. She's the one who broke this case wide open." Marcus looked at his daughter, then at Jasmine, then back at Sophie. "I think," he said slowly, "we have a lot of catching up to do. A lot of things to talk about. A lot of mistakes to fix." "We do," Jasmine agreed. "But not today. Today we celebrate." "Celebrate how?" Sophie's eyes lit up. "Pancakes. Heart-shaped pancakes. Can we, Daddy, can Jasmine make her special pancakes?" Marcus laughed a real laugh, warm and unreserved, the first Jasmine had heard from him in months. "I think that sounds perfect." They walked out of the courthouse together, leaving the chaos behind. Reporters called out questions, but no one stopped to answer. Cameras flashed, but no one posed. They were done being spectacles, done being characters in someone else's story. Now they were just a family, walking toward whatever came next. That evening, the Thornton kitchen was filled with the smell of butter and maple syrup. Jasmine stood at the stove pouring batter into heart shapes, while Sophie perched on a stool beside her bunny tucked under one arm. "Make a dinosaur one too," Sophie requested. "A dinosaur with a heart. A dinosaur eating a heart. Like this." She demonstrated with her bunny making chomping noises. Jasmine laughed. "One heart-eating dinosaur coming right up." Marcus sat at the counter watching them. There was something peaceful in his expression, something that had been missing for years. You know, he said quietly, I forgot how much this house used to smell like home. Jasmine glanced at him. It never stopped being home, Marcus. You just forgot where to look. I think I forgot a lot of things. He paused. Jasmine about what happens next. Later. She flipped a pancake with practiced ease. We said one day at a time, remember? I remember. But I need you to know something. Jasmine turned off the burner and faced him fully. Sophie was occupied with her bunny staging an elaborate battle against an invisible enemy. What is it? Marcus took a breath. I've been thinking about the past 3 years. About all the moments I missed because I was too caught up in grief, too focused on work, too afraid to really be present. And I realized something. What? Sophie didn't just need a caretaker. She needed a mother, and she found one. His eyes held hers. You've been more of a parent to her than I ever was. And I want to make that official. Jasmine's heart skipped. What do you mean? I mean, if you want, I'd like to talk about adoption, formal guardianship, something that gives you real rights, real standing, so that no one can ever try to take her from you again. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. Marcus, you don't have to answer now. I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know I need to earn back your trust. But I wanted you to know that when you're ready, the offer is there. Sophie looked up from her bunny battle, her eyes bright. Does that mean Jasmine would be my real mommy? Marcus smiled gently. She's already your real mommy, sweetheart. This would just make it official on paper. Sophie's face split into the biggest grin Jasmine had ever seen. Yes! Can we do it tomorrow? Can we do it right now? Jasmine laughed, wiping her eyes. It doesn't work quite that fast, baby. There's paperwork and lawyers and... I don't care about paperwork. Sophie threw her arms around Jasmine's waist. I just want you to be my mommy forever and ever. Jasmine knelt down, gathering Sophie close. She looked at Marcus over the little girl's head. I don't know what the future holds, she said honestly. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again. But I know one thing for certain. What's that? I love this child more than anything in this world, and I will never ever let anyone take me away from her again. Marcus nodded, his eyes glistening. That's all I needed to hear. Sophie pulled back, her face serious. Jasmine? Yes, baby. The pancakes are burning. Jasmine spun around. Sure enough, smoke was rising from the skillet. Oh no! She grabbed the pan, dumping the charred remnants into the sink. Sophie dissolved into giggles. Even Marcus laughed. So much for the heart-eating dinosaur, Jasmine sighed. It's okay, Sophie said, climbing back onto her stool. Make a new one. Make it even bigger this time. Jasmine looked at her, this brave, beautiful, impossible child who had taught her more about courage than anyone she'd ever known. You know what? You're right. She picked up the batter bowl. Let's make it the biggest dinosaur this kitchen has ever seen. Sophie cheered. And as Jasmine poured fresh batter onto the hot skillet, the burnt smell faded, replaced by something sweeter. Something that smelled like home. Something that smelled like hope. 3 weeks after the verdict, Evelyn Pierce stood before the judge for sentencing. The courtroom was quieter this time, fewer reporters, fewer spectators. The circus had moved on to other stories, other scandals. But Jasmine was there. She sat in the front row of the gallery, Sophie's hand clasped tightly in hers. Marcus sat on Sophie's other side, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the woman who had nearly destroyed them all. Evelyn looked smaller somehow. The weeks in custody had stripped away her polish. Her hair hung limp around her face. Her designer clothes had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit. She stood at the defendant's table, flanked by her lawyer, staring straight ahead with empty eyes. The judge shuffled papers, then looked up. Evelyn Pierce, you have been found guilty of perjury, obstruction of justice, and child endangerment. Before I pronounce sentence, do you have anything you wish to say? Evelyn's lawyer whispered something in her ear. She shook her head. Very well. The judge removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many cases of cruelty, but this one stands apart. You didn't just lie. You didn't just obstruct justice. You weaponized a child. You painted bruises on a 5-year-old's face and coached her to destroy an innocent woman. You manipulated a grieving father. You corrupted a family from within. He put his glasses back on. The damage you caused cannot be measured in dollars or days. An innocent woman spent weeks in jail facing the possibility of years in prison. A child was forced to carry guilt no child should ever know. A family was torn apart by lies you constructed with calculated precision. Evelyn remained motionless, but Jasmine saw her hands trembling at her sides. Therefore, the judge continued, I sentence you to 8 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 5 years. Additionally, you are permanently banned from any contact with Sophie Thornton or Jasmine Carter. Any violation of this order will result in immediate additional charges. He struck his gavel. This court is adjourned. Evelyn finally moved. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the gallery until they found Jasmine. For a long moment, they stared at each other, the woman who had tried to destroy a life, and the woman who had refused to be destroyed. Jasmine held her gaze without flinching. Evelyn's lips moved. No sound came out, but Jasmine could read the words. This isn't over. Jasmine shook her head slowly. Yes, it is. The bailiffs took Evelyn's arms. She was led away through the side door, her orange jumpsuit disappearing into the shadows. The door closed with a heavy thunk, and just like that, it was finished. Sophie tugged at Jasmine's hand. Is she really going away? Yes, baby, for a very long time. 8 years. 8 years. Sophie's brow furrowed. That's longer than I've been alive. Jasmine smiled despite herself. It is. You'll be all grown up by the time she gets out. Will she try to hurt us again? Jasmine knelt down, taking both of Sophie's hands in hers. She might try. Someday. But you know what? What? It doesn't matter. Because we're stronger now. You, me, your daddy, we're a family. And families protect each other. No matter what. Sophie considered this, her face serious. Then she nodded. Okay. Can we go home now? I want to show you the picture I drew. Jasmine laughed, pulling her into a hug. Yes, baby. Let's go home. They walked out of the courthouse together into the bright Texas sunshine. Marcus fell into step beside them, his hand brushing Jasmine's shoulder. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For being here. For letting Sophie see that justice exists. For... He paused, searching for words. For not giving up. On any of us. Jasmine looked at him. This man who had failed her so completely and who was trying so hard to make amends. I didn't do it for you, she said honestly. I did it for her. Marcus nodded. I know. And that's exactly why I trust you with her life. They reached the car. Sophie climbed into the back seat, already chattering about her drawing and what she wanted for dinner, and whether they could get a puppy now that the bad lady was gone. Jasmine paused before getting in, turning to face Marcus. We need to talk, she said. About everything. About what comes next. I know. Tonight. After Sophie's in bed. I'll be ready. They drove home through streets that felt different now, brighter somehow, full of possibility instead of dread. Sophie sang along to the radio, her bunny dancing in her lap. Marcus drove with both hands on the wheel, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror at his daughter, and Jasmine sat in the passenger seat, watching the world pass by, thinking about how much had changed in just a few months. She'd been arrested, humiliated, called a monster by strangers who didn't know her name. She'd spent weeks in a cell wondering if she'd ever see Sophie again. She'd faced a jury that was ready to convict her before she spoke a single word. And she'd survived. Not just survived, triumphed. The truth had won. Not easily, not quickly, but completely. That evening, after Sophie was tucked into bed with her bunny, and a story about a brave dinosaur who fought off all the bad guys, Jasmine and Marcus sat in his study. The fire crackled softly. 2 glasses of wine sat untouched on the table between them. "I've been thinking," Marcus began slowly, "about what you said, about taking things one day at a time." Jasmine nodded, waiting. "I understand why you said it. After everything I did, everything I failed to do, you have every right to be cautious, to keep your distance, to protect yourself." "But," Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, "but I need you to know something. These past few weeks, watching you with Sophie, seeing how she lights up when you walk into a room, it's made me realize something I should have understood a long time ago." "What's that?" "You're not just her caretaker. You're not just the help. You're her mother, in every way that matters." His voice cracked slightly. "And I was a fool to ever let anyone make me doubt that." Jasmine was silent for a long moment. The fire popped and hissed. "Do you remember?" she said finally. "The first night I stayed late, Sophie was 2. She had a fever, and you had some meeting in New York you couldn't miss. You asked me to stay until you got back." "I remember." She cried for 3 hours straight. Nothing I did helped. She wanted her daddy. She wanted her mommy. But neither of you were there. Jasmine's voice softened. So I held her. All night. I sang every song I knew. I told her stories about my grandmother, about growing up in Louisiana, about anything I could think of. And finally, around 4 in the morning, she stopped crying. She looked up at me with those big blue eyes and said her first sentence. Marcus's breath caught. What did she say? She said, "Don't go, Jasmine." And I told her I wouldn't. I promised. Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes. I've kept that promise for 4 years. Through everything. Through Evelyn. Through the arrest. Through all of it. I never left her. Not in my heart. "I know," Marcus whispered. "I know you didn't. So when you talk about adoption, about making things official, I need you to understand something." Jasmine met his gaze directly. "I don't need a piece of paper to tell me who Sophie is to me. She's my daughter. She's been my daughter since that night when she was 2 years old and begged me not to go." "Then why?" "I'm not finished." Jasmine held up her hand. "The paper isn't for me, it's for Sophie. It's so that when she's older, when she looks at her family tree, she'll see my name there. Officially. Permanently. It's so that no one, not another Evelyn, not some distant relative, not anyone, can ever try to take me away from her again." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then let's do it. As soon as possible." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Jasmine took a breath. This was the hard part, the part she'd been avoiding. "Because adoption would make me Sophie's legal mother, which means I'd have rights, real rights, decision-making power, a say in how she's raised. I want you to have that. Do you?" Jasmine's eyes searched his face. "Even when we disagree, even when I tell you that you're working too much, that you're missing her childhood, that you need to put down your phone and actually be present?" Marcus flinched. "Because that's what being a co-parent means." Jasmine continued. "It means I'm not just the help who follows orders. It means we're equals, partners. And I need to know that you can handle that before we go any further." The silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. Outside, a car passed its headlights, sweeping briefly across the window. Finally, Marcus spoke. "When Sarah died," his voice caught on his late wife's name. "When Sarah died, I didn't know how to be a father anymore. She was the one who held everything together. She was the one who knew what Sophie needed, what I needed. Without her, I was lost." Jasmine softened slightly. "I know. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that made sense. Numbers, deals, meetings, things I could control, things that didn't require me to feel anything." He paused. But Sophie needed more than that. She needed a parent, and I hired one instead of becoming one. Marcus. No, let me finish. He held up his hand, echoing her earlier gesture. You asked if I can handle being equals, partners. And the honest answer is, I don't know. I've never done it before. Sarah and I were partners, but that was different. We built something together from the beginning. He looked at her directly. But here's what I do know. I know that Sophie needs you. I know that she's happier with you than she's ever been with me alone. And I know that if I want to be the father she deserves, I need to learn from someone who already knows how. Jasmine felt tears prick her eyes. I'm asking you to teach me, Marcus said simply. Not as an employee, not as a subordinate, as a partner. Teach me how to be the father I should have been all along. For a long moment, Jasmine couldn't speak. This was what she'd wanted to hear, what she'd needed to hear. Not just an apology, apologies were easy, but genuine humility, a willingness to change, a recognition that fatherhood wasn't something you could delegate. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Okay, we'll do this together, one day at a time. But Marcus, she leaned forward, her voice firm. If you slip back into old patterns, if you start missing her recitals, forgetting her birthdays, putting work before her, I will call you out. Publicly if I have to. Sophie comes first. Always. Marcus nodded without hesitation. I wouldn't expect anything less. Good. Jasmine picked up her wine glass for the first time, taking a small sip. Then let's talk to the lawyers next week. Get the adoption process started. Marcus's face broke into a smile, genuine, warm, relieved. Thank you, Jasmine, for everything. Don't thank me yet. We have a lot of work ahead. I know. But for the first time in a long time, I'm actually looking forward to it. They clinked glasses. The fire settled into a steady glow. And somewhere upstairs, Sophie slept peacefully, dreaming of dinosaurs and heart-shaped pancakes. 6 months later, Jasmine stood in a different courtroom. This one was smaller, warmer, filled with flowers, and the faces of people who actually loved them. Sophie sat in the front row wearing a dress she'd picked out herself, bright yellow covered in daisies. Her bunny had a matching bow tied around its neck. Rachel Torres sat beside her, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Detective Warren was there too, looking uncomfortable in a suit but grinning broadly. Mrs. Patterson had come, her expression no longer suspicious but genuinely warm. Even some of the household staff had shown up, forming a small crowd of witnesses to what was about to happen. Jasmine stood before the judge. A different judge, one who smiled when she looked at them. Marcus stood beside her. Sophie bouncing between them, too excited to stay still. This is one of my favorite duties as a judge, the woman said, her voice kind. Finalizing adoptions, making families official. She looked down at the papers before her. Jasmine Marie Carter, you are here today seeking to adopt Sophie Elizabeth Thornton as your legal daughter. Do you understand the rights and responsibilities this entails? I do, Jasmine said, her voice steady. Do you promise to love, protect, and care for Sophie as your own child through all circumstances for the rest of her life? I do. The words came out thick with emotion. I always have. The judge smiled. Marcus Daniel Thornton, do you consent to this adoption? I do, Marcus said, without reservation. And Sophie? The judge leaned forward, her eyes twinkling. Do you want Jasmine to be your official mommy? Sophie practically vibrated with excitement. Yes, 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 yes. Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Well then, the judge picked up her pen. By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I hereby declare that Sophie Elizabeth Thornton is now the legal daughter of Jasmine Marie Carter. This adoption is final and irrevocable. She signed the papers with a flourish. Congratulations, Jasmine. You're officially a mother. Sophie exploded from her seat, launching herself at Jasmine. "Mommy, you're my real mommy now!" Jasmine caught her, spinning her around, tears streaming down her face. "I've always been your real mommy, baby. Now it's just on paper." "But paper makes it official." "Yes, baby, paper makes it official." Marcus joined them, wrapping his arms around both of them. For a moment they stood there, mother, father, daughter, holding each other in the middle of a courtroom that had once threatened to tear them apart. Rachel was openly crying now. Detective Warren blew his nose loudly. Even the judge looked misty-eyed. "All right," the judge said, clearing her throat. "That concludes today's proceedings. You're all free to go celebrate." They walked out of the courthouse into brilliant sunshine, the same courthouse where Jasmine had once been dragged in handcuffs, where she'd sobbed and begged for someone to believe her, where she'd faced the very real possibility of losing everything. Now she walked out as Sophie's mother. Officially. Permanently. Irrevocably. "Can we get ice cream?" Sophie asked, her hand clasped in Jasmine's. "We can get whatever you want, baby." "Even a puppy?" Jasmine laughed. "Let's start with ice cream. We'll discuss the puppy later." Marcus fell into step beside them. "You know, I've been thinking about getting a dog for a while." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Really? Really? A family should have a dog. Don't you think, Jasmine?" Jasmine looked at him. This man who had failed her, who had doubted her, who had nearly let her rot in prison. This man who had stood up when it mattered most, who had thrown out the woman manipulating his household, who had fought to make things right. This man who was trying so hard to be better. "I think," she said slowly, "that a family should have a lot of things. Love, trust, honesty, pancakes shaped like hearts." She smiled. "And maybe a dog." Sophie cheered, spinning in circles on the courthouse steps. Her yellow dress flared around her like sunshine. Rachel caught up with them, pulling Jasmine into a hug. "I'm so happy for you, for all of you." "I couldn't have done it without you," Jasmine said. "You believed in me when no one else would." "That's not true. Sophie believed in you. So did Detective Warren. And eventually even Marcus came around." Jasmine glanced at Marcus, who was now chasing Sophie around a nearby bench, both of them laughing. "He did," she admitted. "Eventually." "People can change, Jasmine. You proved that." "Sophie proved it. She was the brave one." Rachel shook her head. "You were both brave. In different ways. And now, look at you, a real family." Jasmine watched Sophie tackle her father, bringing him down onto the grass. Marcus pretended to be mortally wounded, while Sophie giggled uncontrollably. "Yeah," Jasmine said softly, "a real family." That night, after ice cream and dinner, and a very long discussion about what kind of puppy they might get, Jasmine tucked Sophie into bed. "Mommy!" The word still sent a thrill through Jasmine's heart. "Yes, baby." "Are you happy?" Jasmine smoothed the hair back from Sophie's forehead. "I'm the happiest I've ever been." "Because of the paper?" "No, baby. Because of you." Jasmine leaned down and kissed her forehead. "The paper just tells other people what we already knew. That you're mine and I'm yours. Forever." Sophie snuggled deeper into her blankets, her bunny tucked under her chin. "I'm glad you didn't go away. I told you I never would. Remember?" "I remember. But I was scared. When Evelyn made me say those things, I was so scared you'd go away and never come back." Jasmine's heart ached. Even now, months later, the trauma lingered. Sophie still had nightmares sometimes. She still clung a little tighter than she used to. "Can I tell you a secret?" Jasmine said softly. Sophie's eyes widened. "What?" "I was scared too. Really, really scared. When I was in that jail, when I thought I might never see you again, I cried every night." "You did?" "I did. But you know what kept me going?" "What?" "You. Thinking about you. Remembering your laugh, your smile. The way you always want extra syrup on your pancakes." Jasmine smiled through her tears. I told myself that no matter what happened, I would find my way back to you. Because that's what mommies do. They never give up. Sophie reached up and touched Jasmine's cheek. You're the best mommy in the whole world. And you're the best daughter. Now go to sleep, baby. We have a big day tomorrow. What's tomorrow? Tomorrow we're going to look at puppies. Sophie's face lit up. Really? Really? But only if you go to sleep right now. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut so tight her whole face scrunched up. I'm sleeping, I'm sleeping. Jasmine laughed, kissing her one more time. Good night, baby. I love you. I love you too, Mommy. Jasmine turned off the lamp and walked to the door. She paused at the threshold, looking back at her daughter, her official legal forever daughter already drifting off to sleep. 4 years ago, she'd taken this job because she needed the money. She'd never imagined it would become her whole life, her whole heart. But here she was, a mother, against all odds. She closed the door softly and walked downstairs where Marcus was waiting with 2 cups of tea. She asleep. Out like a light. They sat together on the couch, the house quiet around them. Through the window, stars glittered in the Texas sky. I've been thinking. Marcus said about what you said. About taking things one day at a time. And I think you were right. We've had a lot of one days now. Good ones. He paused. I'd like to keep having them, if you would. Jasmine turned to look at him. His face was open, vulnerable, not the mask of a billionaire or the armor of a grieving widower, but something real. Something human. What exactly are you asking? I'm asking if you'll stay, not as Sophie's mother that's already decided, but as more. As a partner. As a co-parent. As whatever you're willing to be. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment. She thought about everything they'd been through. The accusations, the trial, the terror of almost losing Sophie, the slow, painful process of rebuilding trust. She thought about Marcus's failures, his blindness, his willingness to believe the worst about her. But she also thought about his growth, his humility. The way he looked at Sophie now really looked at her present and attentive, in a way he'd never been before. People could change. She had to believe that. I'm not ready for romance, she said finally. I don't know if I ever will be. Too much has happened. Marcus nodded, accepting this without argument. But I'm willing to be partners. For Sophie. To raise her together, make decisions together, build a life that puts her first. Jasmine met his eyes. If you can accept that, then yes. I'll stay. Marcus's face broke into a smile, not disappointment, just genuine warmth. That's more than I deserve, and more than enough. He extended his hand. Jasmine looked at it for a moment. Then she took it. Partners, she said. Partners, he agreed. They sat together as the night deepened, 2 people bound not by romance, but by something perhaps more durable, shared love for a little girl who had taught them both what courage really meant. 1 year later, Jasmine stood at the window of Sophie's room watching her daughter play in the backyard with a golden retriever named Sunny. The puppy, no longer a puppy, now bounded through the grass, while Sophie shrieked with laughter. Marcus was out there too, pretending to be a monster while Sophie and Sunny ganged up on him. His suit jacket lay abandoned on a lawn chair. His tie was wrapped around Sunny's neck like a cape. Jasmine smiled. This was her life now. Not the life she'd planned, not the life she'd expected, but the life she'd been given and fought for, and earned. Sophie looked up and saw her in the window. She waved frantically. Mommy, come play with us. Jasmine waved back. I'm coming. She turned from the window and caught her reflection in Sophie's mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who'd stood in that courtroom a year ago. That woman had been broken, terrified, barely holding herself together. This woman was whole. She walked downstairs and out into the yard into the warmth of the afternoon sun. Sunny immediately attacked her, leg's tail wagging furiously. Sophie grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the imaginary battle. You have to help us defeat the monster, Sophie commanded. "I think I've already defeated enough monsters." Jasmine laughed. "How about we have a picnic instead? Can Sunny come?" Of course Sunny can come. Marcus collapsed dramatically onto the grass, declaring himself defeated. Sophie cheered in victory. And Jasmine stood in the middle of it all, surrounded by the imperfect, beautiful family she'd built from the ashes of everything that had tried to destroy her. The truth was stubborn, her grandmother used to say. It finds a way, even when men try to bury it. And standing here now, watching her daughter laugh in the Texas sunshine, Jasmine knew her grandmother had been right. The truth had found its way, through the lies and the fear, through the courthouse and the cell, through every whisper and accusation and moment of despair. The truth had won, and so had she. Justice doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it whispers through a child's courage, a detective's instinct, a lawyer's persistence, and a mother's unbreakable love. But make no mistake, when truth finally speaks, nothing in this world can silence it again.